Nothing that's happening right now is random. And the moment you stop pretending otherwise, everything else you're feeling finally starts to make sense. Not the headlines, not the arguments at dinner tables that never used to happen before. Something underneath the surface of ordinary life has shifted, and you've felt the edge of it for longer than you've let yourself admit out loud. You go through your day, and most of it looks the same as it always has. The same commute, the same coffee, the same faces at the same hour. And yet something behind your eyes keeps registering a difference you can't quite locate, like a room where someone moved the furniture an inch and you can't name what changed, only that it did. This isn't about the news cycle, and it isn't about politics or weather or anything you could point to on a screen and say, there, that's the difference. It's quieter than that. It shows up in the pause before you answer a simple question, in the way silence feels heavier at certain hours than it used to. Here's the pattern almost nobody names correctly, because naming it honestly means admitting you've been sensing something you couldn't prove for a while now. You've been calling it burnout. You've been calling it getting older, getting busier, simply losing the patience you used to have for things that never used to bother you at all. But burnout doesn't usually come with this particular texture, this sense of watching, of being gently observed by something that isn't unkind, just present, just patient, in a way nothing in your ordinary life has ever been patient with you before. Think about how many people around you have started asking bigger questions lately, seemingly out of nowhere. Co-workers who never once mentioned meaning or purpose are suddenly wondering out loud whether their life adds up to anything larger. That's not a trend someone engineered for clicks. That's closer to a tuning fork struck somewhere, and everyone nearby quietly starting to vibrate at the same new frequency. You've felt your own sense of time bend a little too, haven't you? Certain nights stretch on, thick and slow, full of thoughts you can't quite finish. Other days disappear entirely, gone before you've registered they even started at all. Here's the first real crack in what you've probably assumed up until now. This isn't some distant intelligence deciding, on a whim, to finally make contact with humanity from somewhere impossibly far away. It never worked that way. And expecting it to arrive that way is exactly why so many people miss what's actually unfolding right in front of them tonight. Certain traditions describe a presence connected to a specific star system, associated with heart wisdom, healing, and a very old kind of teaching meant to restore balance rather than deliver spectacle. Whatever name feels right to you for that presence, the function described across very different accounts stays strangely, almost suspiciously consistent. Listen, that claim deserves real scrutiny, not blind acceptance. And it deserves exactly that scrutiny before you decide what to actually do with it tonight. But scrutiny isn't the same thing as automatic dismissal either, especially when the description lines up this precisely with something you've already sensed alone, on nights you couldn't quite explain to anyone nearby. Here's the part almost nobody names correctly when they talk about contact of any kind. It was never really about proof arriving dramatically enough to convince a skeptical mind once and for all, settling the argument permanently. Proof was never really the actual point of any of this. The mechanism operates in something quieter. Perception, willingness, the specific quality of attention you're bringing to this exact ordinary evening. And that mechanism doesn't wait politely for your permission before it starts working on you anyway. You're already responding to it right now, in this precise moment. Whether you've named it consciously or not, already reaching for a comfortable explanation instead of sitting with what's actually stirring quietly underneath tonight. Here's where this needs to slow down for a second, because the instinct to look outward towards some distant star system toward beings entirely separate from your own daily existence misses the actual location of everything being described here. This doesn't begin light years away, waiting patiently to finally arrive and rearrange your life for you. It begins inside your own attention, in the exact moment you decide whether tonight's strange feeling gets a real name or gets quietly filed away as nothing. What people call contact is, underneath the language, simply perception finally letting through something it spent years agreeing to filter out by default. Without noticing that difference, the whole subject stays distant, abstract, something happening near stars instead of something happening through the quality of your own noticing right now. I put something together for exactly the moment you're standing in tonight, and I want to be honest with you about why it matters right now, specifically to you and not someone else. What you've been sensing isn't confusion, and it isn't simply exhaustion catching up with you at the end of a long week. It's the early edge of a recognition that something has been reaching toward your attention for far longer than you've had language to hold it clearly. I invite you to download the digital book I prepared for you, The Great Spiritual Game Hidden Behind Your Consciousness, because this video can point toward that recognition, but it can't walk you through the full structure sitting patiently behind it. Inside those pages, the connection between this presence and your own perception gets laid out clearly. What's actually shifting inside you, why it's intensifying now, and what it quietly asks of you as someone already inside the pattern, not simply watching it unfold from a comfortable distance. This isn't speculation dressed up as certainty, and it isn't another list of predictions to wait on nervously. It's a map, built for people who sense correctly that something larger is moving and want the structure underneath the feeling itself. The link is waiting in the first pinned comment below this video, ready whenever you decide to look. Read it slowly, without rushing toward conclusions, and notice which lines feel less like new information and more like something you already suspected. Quietly, on your own, long before tonight ever gave it real words. You close that thought for now, but something in you doesn't fully close alongside it. It stays half-lit, waiting. The way a lamp left on in another room changes how the whole house feels. Because once you allow yourself to consider that this presence might already be reaching you through perception rather than distance, a sharper question follows close behind it. If it's already here, why does some part of you keep quietly working to keep it at arm's length? Here's where the pattern turns personal faster than most people expect it to. You feel that odd warmth spreading through your chest during a quiet moment. And within seconds, you've already renamed it something familiar. Indigestion, tiredness, nothing worth mentioning to anyone. That renaming feels like practicality. It isn't. It's a rehearsed exit, worn so smooth by repetition, it no longer even registers as a choice you're actively making. You tell yourself you're staying sensible by not making too much of a strange coincidence, a number that keeps repeating, a dream that felt more real than dreams usually feel. Sometimes that's genuinely wise. And sometimes, underneath that reasonable-sounding caution, there's simply fear, dressed carefully in the exact language of good judgment. Listen, discernment and avoidance can look nearly identical from where you're standing, but only one of them keeps you rooted exactly where you've always been. Real discernment stays open long enough to actually examine something before deciding either way. Avoidance shuts the door before examination even begins, then quietly congratulates itself for staying so grounded about nothing ever shifting at all. Pause here for a second. Notice your throat. Is it relaxed or slightly tight, holding back words you haven't let yourself say out loud even to yourself tonight? That tightness isn't random. It's a decision your body made a long time ago, and it's still running quietly, still active, right now, while you sit here listening. This is the mechanism almost nobody names correctly when they talk about resisting contact of any kind. The mind doesn't reject this because it's closed or unintelligent. It rejects it because somewhere earlier in your life, an idea this large once felt disorienting, even destabilizing to whatever sense of order you'd carefully built. And no update was ever issued to say that threat had genuinely passed. Think about the first time you ever encountered something like what's being described tonight, maybe years ago, maybe from a passing comment you half remember now. What did you actually do with it in that moment? Most people laugh, reflexively, before the thought even finishes forming completely. That laugh isn't always mockery. Sometimes it's simply the fastest available exit from a feeling too large to hold steady in that particular instant. You've done this yourself somewhere at some point, waving away a signal too quickly, not because you examined it honestly and found it lacking, but because waving it away felt safer than sitting inside the discomfort of not knowing yet. That isn't a character flaw worth punishing. It's a mechanism, and mechanisms can be studied calmly without turning the study into self-judgment. If you're still here, past the point where the easy dismissals usually take full control, that isn't nothing. Something in you already suspects there's more worth examining here than a quick brush-off would allow. And that suspicion is exactly the beginning of what this whole conversation keeps circling steadily back toward. Let's go deeper into how this resistance actually operates. Because the surface behavior, the renaming, the quick distraction, the fast change of subject, is only the visible edge of something larger underneath. There's a quieter calculation constantly running beneath it. If I take this seriously and I'm wrong, I'll feel foolish in front of people whose opinion matters to me. If I take it seriously and I'm right, everything I thought was stable just shifted beneath my feet. Either way, the mind flags it as risk, and risk gets minimized by default long before curiosity ever gets an honest vote. So you stay suspended in the comfortable middle, interested enough to keep watching videos exactly like this one, late at night, when no one else is around to notice the interest, cautious enough to never quite let it change how you actually move through an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. That middle ground feels safe. It also guarantees nothing ever truly shifts, no matter how many hours you spend absorbing information that never gets permission to land anywhere real inside you. Here's where the difference between healthy discernment and control disguised as wisdom becomes worth naming clearly, once you actually look at it directly instead of past it. Discernment asks honest, careful questions and still moves forward when something rings true underneath the questioning. Control disguised as discernment asks the exact same questions endlessly, using each one as a fresh excuse to postpone any real movement whatsoever. You've likely met both versions somewhere in your own circle of people. The one who questions an idea and still stays genuinely curious about where it might actually lead, versus the one who questions everything reflexively, using skepticism as a permanent wall rather than a temporary filter to sort through carefully. One sharpens understanding over time. The other simply protects the same unchanged position indefinitely, dressed up convincingly as careful thinking. Notice what's happening inside you right now, in this exact instant, while you're weighing how seriously to take everything said so far tonight. Some part of you is already deciding quietly whether to let this actually mean something real or to file it away later as interesting content and move on completely unchanged by it. That decision made in the space of a few seconds, is itself the entire mechanism this section has been carefully describing, happening live inside you as you listen. Here's an uncomfortable truth worth sitting with instead of deflecting immediately tonight. This resistance isn't happening to you from some outside force keeping you deliberately unaware or asleep against your will. It's a loop running quietly in your own attention, reinforced every single time curiosity gets overridden by the comfort of staying exactly where you've always stood. Think about the last strange, unexplainable moment that actually reached you fully, instead of sliding past unexamined like the others. Did it stay with you for hours afterward, working on something underneath conscious thought? Or did you manage to distract it away within minutes of it even happening at all? That answer tells you more about your actual relationship to this contact than any belief you'd state out loud to someone else nearby. This is where the ground shifts again, so stay with it a little longer tonight. You don't need more evidence of strange occurrences piling up. You've likely already collected more than enough over the years to fill several conversations you've never actually had the courage to start with anyone close to you. What's missing isn't proof. What's missing is permission, granted from somewhere deeper than curiosity alone, to actually let what you already sense privately be true. And here's the question worth holding quietly in silence rather than rushing to answer out loud immediately tonight. If everything described here turned out to be entirely accurate, if this presence really has been tuning your attention for far longer than you've realized, would the version of you sitting here right now know what to actually do with that recognition? Or would some old practiced discomfort quietly shrink it back down to something manageable enough to forget completely by morning? That discomfort has a name, and it isn't confusion, and it isn't foolishness either. It's simply the friction between the scale of what's actually being described and the identity you've built carefully around staying small enough to remain comfortable inside a familiar, explainable version of your own life. If you've made it this far, past every reflex specifically built to turn you away early tonight, that isn't accidental in the slightest way. Not everyone stays present for the part where the language stops offering easy comfort and starts asking something real of them instead. And if this is still landing clearly for you, you're already standing somewhere different from where most viewers give up and quietly scroll away. That's exactly where this goes next. Not into more strange occurrences to catalog nervously, not into another list of signs to watch obsessively for. Into the deeper structure underneath all of it. Who you've quietly decided you're allowed to become. Once contact stops feeling like something arriving from far outside and starts feeling like something already living patiently inside your own perception. Who you're allowed to become in relation to this contact isn't decided by how many strange moments you've quietly gathered over the years. It's decided by something far quieter, something that operates whether the signals are loud or barely there at all. Call it the ceiling you placed without ever consciously choosing it over what feels genuinely possible for someone exactly like you. Here's the simplest way to describe it, without dressing it in anything overly mystical tonight. Identity is just the story your mind keeps repeating about who you are, so consistently in so many small, ordinary moments that it stopped sounding like a story and became something you mistake entirely for settled fact. Facts don't get questioned. They simply get lived inside, quietly, day after unremarkable day. This is exactly where wanting contact and believing you're actually capable of receiving it split apart from each other, even though most people treat those two things as identical. You can want this connection with your whole chest and still not believe underneath that wanting that it was ever really meant for someone like you specifically. Desire lives in imagination. Identity lives somewhere older. Somewhere imagination has to formally request entry before anything real gets granted. Think about the people who seem to receive these signals with unusual ease, almost effortlessly, while others study the exact same phenomena for years and never quite feel anything genuinely shift inside them. It was never really about sensitivity or luck or some rare gift handed selectively to a few at birth. It was about which of them had already decided, somewhere below conscious thought, that receiving belonged inside their identity rather than remaining outside it, waiting patiently to be earned. Listen, hoping you might one day sense something real and expecting that connection as simply part of who you already are. Those aren't the same internal posture, even though they sound nearly identical when spoken aloud. Hope reaches toward an outcome that might or might not arrive, negotiating constantly with doubt the whole way there. Expectation already lives inside the outcome, calm, almost bored by its own certainty, entirely unmoved by whatever noise tries to shake it loose. Here's a small, ordinary example, because this pattern hides best in ordinary moments rather than dramatic ones. Someone mentions, almost casually, that you seem unusually attuned lately, like you sense things other people simply miss. Watch what happens in the half second before you respond to that observation. Some people simply receive it. Others deflect instantly, insisting they're not special at all, as if attunement itself required immediate defense. That reflex isn't humility, it's identity, quietly protecting its current shape against information that doesn't match the file it's already holding about who you're supposed to be in the world. You've done this yourself somewhere in some corner of your life, likely without even noticing it happening in real time as it occurred. It isn't a flaw worth punishing yourself over tonight. It's a mechanism, and mechanisms can be studied calmly, the same way you'd study a pattern showing up in someone else's life instead of your own. The mind isn't sabotaging you here. It's staying coherent, because holding two contradictory beliefs about your own capacity creates a specific, uncomfortable friction most people will do almost anything to avoid feeling directly. That friction shows up right after something unusually clear happens to you. A moment of recognition arriving faster than doubt has time to catch up with it. Instead of trusting it, there's often a flicker of suspicion, as if clarity itself was somehow too easy to be legitimate. That flicker is coherence, quietly pulling you back toward the story it already believes is true about your actual capacity to receive anything real. Pause here for a moment. Notice your breathing and let it slow just slightly. Ask yourself honestly, when a moment of connection arrives easily, do you trust it, or do you brace instinctively for the doubt that surely has to be coming to correct it? That bracing isn't wisdom, even though it's remarkably skilled at wearing wisdom's expression convincingly. Here's the part that tends to reorganize everything once it's actually understood clearly tonight. This contact isn't only responding to how open-minded you claim to be out loud. It's responding to what feels familiar to you personally. And for most people, receptivity and familiarity have almost nothing in common yet, which is exactly why so few ever notice the gap directly for themselves. If you've stayed with this past the point where distraction usually wins out completely, some part of you already suspected this before tonight gave it clear language to finally hold on to. That isn't coincidence. It's what happens when something true meets a mind that was already circling this exact question quietly, alone, long before finding real words for it here tonight. Let's go further, because identity isn't only belief, it's rehearsed familiarity, built through repetition until it feels less like a choice and more like whether you simply learn to live inside without ever questioning it directly. You didn't decide once, cleanly, that this kind of contact wasn't meant for someone like you. You lived through enough ordinary moments where nothing seemed to happen that your system quietly filed the absence as reliable, something to expect again rather than something worth re-examining honestly. This is why simply wanting to be more open rarely holds for very long under genuine testing. Wanting operates in the conscious mind, the newest, most recent layer of the entire system. Identity operates underneath it, older, faster, largely indifferent to whatever your conscious mind has recently decided it wants to believe about itself tonight. Here's where all of this starts to reshape how you understand everything discussed so far in this conversation. It was never only about detecting signals accurately from the outside, waiting patiently for proof strong enough to finally convince you completely. It's about which version of yourself your system has quietly filed as familiar enough to actually receive. Because familiar is what gets reinforced, regardless of how consciously you want to feel differently in the meantime. This is exactly why some people can read every account, study every description, and still feel nothing genuinely shift internally, no matter how convinced their intellect eventually becomes. The information was never really the problem here. The mismatch between information and identity was. You can believe the facts thoroughly and still meet them from an identity that was never updated to hold what genuine receiving actually requires of you. Real change here doesn't begin with consuming more accounts, more descriptions, more convincing arguments about why any of this is real. It begins with smaller, stranger moments. Noticing the flicker of suspicion when clarity arrives too easily. Noticing the reflex to deflect your own attunement. Noticing the quiet discomfort right before you're about to trust something you've spent years dismissing instead of examining. Not everyone catches this the first time it's said plainly tonight. Most people hear your identity decides what you can receive and nod along politely, then return to searching for more external proof, waiting for the universe to hand them permission to feel differently about who they are. If something in you just sat up a little straighter at that sentence, that reaction alone puts you somewhere different from where most viewers are still sitting right now. Here's something worth being honest with you about, because pretending otherwise would waste both of our time tonight. A single video, however clear, can describe the shape of this contact. It cannot walk you through the actual patient work of rebuilding an identity capable of holding it fully and steadily. That work has sequence. It has real structure, It has specific ways of recognizing familiarity before it hardens back into fact. And I built exactly that inside the great spiritual game hidden behind your consciousness. I invite you to download that digital book now. I prepared it specifically for the moment you're standing in tonight, not as another catalog of signs to watch for anxiously, but as a working structure for becoming someone capable of actually receiving what you've already been sensing for years now. It goes further than any single video ever could into how identity actually forms around contact like this, how it gets mistaken for imagination, and how it quietly negotiates with every strange moment before you're even consciously aware a reaction was chosen at all. This isn't a collection of proof meant to convince skeptics. It's the missing layer underneath everything you've already felt and never quite had language to trust fully until now. The link is waiting in the first pinned comment, the same place it's been since this conversation started tonight. What you've sensed for years, that quiet suspicion that something has been reaching toward you specifically, isn't something to keep filing away as imagination any longer. It's already moving. The only real question left is whether you meet it from an identity actually built to hold it. There's a sensation worth naming before anything else here, because this next part isn't only conceptual. You'll feel it first as a gentle expansion across the chest, the kind that shows up right before something reorganizes rather than breaks apart entirely. Let it sit there a moment before reaching for explanation. Everything discussed so far has stayed close to behavior and identity. What you do, what you've quietly decided, is true about your own capacity to receive. There's a layer underneath even that, closer to how this contact actually reaches you in the first place, before identity ever gets a chance to react to it at all. Call it a lens, not a belief system, not a personality trait. The actual shape through which this specific kind of connection gets filtered before it becomes something you can finally name clearly. Certain traditions describe this particular lens as tied to a specific star system, associated with the heart, with healing, with a frequency oriented toward restoring balance rather than delivering spectacle for its own sake. Set the mythology aside for a moment and look at the function underneath the name instead. Whatever you call it, its job stays precise. It decides what gets through clearly, what arrives distorted, and what never lands at all because it doesn't match the shape already carved into your particular way of receiving. Here's why naming it matters practically tonight, not poetically. Vague language keeps vague confusion firmly in place. I feel something sometimes explains nothing and changes nothing about how you actually respond to it moving forward. My lens distorts anything that threatens my sense of what's rational before I am even aware of receiving it. That's a mechanism. Mechanisms can be worked with directly. Vague feelings can only be endured indefinitely, quietly, alone. Pause here for a moment. Feel your feet against the floor. Are they grounded, settled, or slightly restless, bracing for a doubt that hasn't even fully arrived yet tonight? Settle them deliberately, right now, and notice how much effort that actually required from you just now. That effort is the lens, mid-operation, doing exactly what it always does, quietly, automatically, without ever asking your permission first. Everything named so far, the reflexive renaming of strange sensations, the identity too small to hold what's actually being received, the deflection of your own attunement as if it needed excusing constantly, none of it was separate information. It was the same lens, showing up in different rooms of your attention, wearing different disguises each time, so it wouldn't be recognized as the same visitor returning again and again. This is where the whole approach quietly changes direction tonight. Most people, once they sense something real stirring inside them, respond by trying to do more. More research, more meditation attempts, more effort thrown at forcing open a connection that was never meant to be forced in the first place. That instinct is understandable. It's also, in this specific case, almost always the wrong move entirely. And here's the precise reason it fails. You don't need more effort directed outward right now. You need less contradiction inside your own response to what's already quietly arriving. Every moment of genuine openness held while the lens still filters for doubt creates two competing signals fighting inside the same narrow channel. And the lens, loyal to its oldest instructions, will side with the older signal nearly every single time it's given the chance. Say that part again, slower, because it tends to undo years of anxious searching in a single sentence tonight. It's not about trying harder to receive. It's about no longer working against your own openness in the same breath you're actively trying to build it. Stop contradicting the receptivity you're asking for, and it finally has somewhere real to land, instead of colliding with its own opposite the moment it actually arrives. Here's a question worth actually answering, not just letting slide past unexamined tonight. In the last week, how many times did you feel a genuine flicker of connection, only to immediately undercut it with a thought like, "That's probably just my imagination working overtime again tonight"? That second thought isn't neutral commentary. It's a direct instruction, delivered to the exact same lens that just received the first, quieter signal only seconds before it. This is where intensity gets mistaken for genuine progress, and the two deserve careful separating tonight. Intensity is loud, dramatic meditation sessions, urgent searching for signs everywhere you look, emotional peaks that feel significant in the moment and exhaust you completely by evening. Stability is quiet. The same simple, uncontradicted openness held day after unremarkable day without needing a dramatic sign to justify its own presence. The lens doesn't respond to intensity nearly as strongly as most people assume it does. It responds to consistency, to a signal that shows up the same way whether you're actively searching or simply living an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. A quiet, stable openness held across months will outlast a loud, intense searching held across 3 excited days, without exception whatsoever. If you've noticed yourself settling rather than straining through this particular section, that's not a small thing to overlook tonight. Not everyone stays present for the part where the language gets more precise, less dramatic, more like mechanics than mystery. If this is landing clearly for you, you're already standing somewhere different from where most viewers remain, still waiting for the next dramatic sign to finally convince them completely. Not everyone who watches this will actually follow it all the way through to this exact point tonight. Here's the part that tends to reframe everything discussed so far, once it's actually understood at this level clearly. This contact was never simply something external to detect and wait for from a safe, skeptical distance. It's closer to a frequency held locally, inside your own attention, that the lens then reflects back to you as the specific quality your experience of connection ends up taking shape around. That reframing changes what you actually do next, practically, starting tonight rather than someday in the vague future. You stop scanning outward compulsively, hoping enough evidence will finally produce the certainty you're looking for. You start noticing where, right now, in this ordinary evening, you're contradicting the openness you claim to want. And you simply stop doing that, one contradiction at a time, without needing a dramatic sign to mark the shift. This isn't for everyone listening tonight, and that deserves saying plainly instead of softened for comfort. Most people will hear this and find it interesting, then return tomorrow to the same anxious searching, unchanged, because actually holding a steady lens costs more than simply understanding the concept intellectually ever will. Understanding is the easy part. Living from receptivity is the part almost nobody follows all the way through to the end. That's where the next layer opens, not into more explanation of the lens itself, but into what it actually costs you. Specifically, every time you let doubt run the show instead of catching it early, before it settles into something harder to name and even harder to undo later on. The cost of letting doubt run the show doesn't announce itself in a single dramatic evening. It gathers the way frost forms on a window overnight, invisible until morning when you finally notice how much of the glass it's covered. A week of quietly dismissing small moments doesn't feel unusual while you're inside it. A decade of the same habit starts to feel like personality, like simply who you turned out to be around this particular subject. This is worth naming plainly, because vague spiritual language tends to soften exactly what should stay sharp here tonight. Contradiction has a price, and the price is years. The specific, unrepeatable kind spent waiting for proof convincing enough to finally let in what you've already sensed correctly for a long time now. That isn't guilt. It's arithmetic. And arithmetic deserves honesty more than comfort right now. Think about someone you've known who insists, constantly, that they'd welcome real contact instantly if it ever actually happened to them directly and clearly. And yet, somehow, every strange coincidence in their own life gets explained away within minutes. Every vivid dream gets blamed instantly on something they ate too late. From outside, the pattern is obvious within the first few sentences. From inside, it feels like each moment is simply coincidence, nothing more than that. You've probably been that person yourself in some corner of your own experience with all of this. Maybe not dreams specifically, maybe a persistent sense of being accompanied, maybe a feeling that arrives right before something meaningful happens and then quietly gets dismissed anyway. The specific experience matters less than the shape, and the shape stays consistent. A stated openness running directly against an unspoken dismissal, with the dismissal quietly winning nearly every single time it's actually tested honestly. Here's what genuine openness actually means here, once you strip away the aesthetic language surrounding it entirely. It isn't a constant, dramatic anticipation of contact happening any minute now. And it isn't pretending every unusual feeling must carry enormous significance immediately. Openness is simpler and far less glamorous than that. It's the absence of active contradiction between the receptivity you claim out loud and the automatic dismissal you keep running quietly in the background of an ordinary evening like this one. You don't need to feel electrified constantly to be genuinely open. You need to stop actively arguing against the moments you say you welcome, in the small, unnoticed instances that never make it into the story you tell others about yourself. That's a lower bar than most spiritual content suggests, and it's also a far more honest one. One you can actually meet repeatedly, without needing a dramatic encounter to sustain your belief in it. Pause for a moment here and notice your chest. Is it open, easy, or slightly guarded, as if bracing against something that hasn't even arrived yet tonight? Soften it deliberately and notice how unfamiliar that softening feels if you've been braced for a long stretch without fully realizing it was happening at all. Here's a consequence rarely discussed openly, because it's uncomfortable in a way most content about this subject tends to avoid entirely. Every year spent in contradiction doesn't just delay recognition. It reinforces the belief that recognition was never really available to someone like you in the first place. The delay becomes its own evidence, feeding back into the dismissal that caused it, tightening the loop instead of loosening it gradually over time. That's the part worth sitting with honestly, without flinching away too quickly tonight. It isn't only that nothing seemed to happen, it's that the nothing itself became proof in your own mind that connection was never really meant for you specifically. And that proof gets cited every time something real shows up, looking slightly too gentle to trust fully at first. If you're still here, past the point where comfort usually ends and honesty usually starts costing something real, that isn't coincidence, and it never has been tonight. Something in you decided before this video even started playing that it was finally time to stop managing the doubt and start actually examining what sits quietly underneath it. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from managing contradiction instead of resolving it fully and honestly. You've felt it. The tiredness that has nothing to do with how much sleep you got, the kind that shows up after a day when nothing physically demanding even happened around you at all. That's not overthinking. That's the cost of holding two opposing signals steady at once, hour after hour, without ever letting either one fully speak clearly. Most people misdiagnose that exhaustion as simply being a skeptical person by nature, as if temperament alone explained the whole pattern completely. That diagnosis is comforting, and it's also almost always incomplete tonight. The exhaustion isn't from being naturally skeptical, it's from claiming openness, while simultaneously rehearsing dismissal in 100 small, unexamined moments across a single ordinary day. Here's where the body enters this conversation directly, because none of this stays purely mental for very long once it settles in fully. Contradiction held long enough doesn't just tire the mind. It settles into the wrists, the base of the skull, the space behind the sternum, the places where openness has nowhere left to go once the mind stops metabolizing the tension consciously on its own. This is not for everyone listening tonight, and that needs saying plainly instead of softened for comfort right now. Most people will hear this and quietly find it interesting, then return tomorrow to the exact same dismissal, unchanged, because actually resolving it costs something intellectual understanding alone never demands of anyone. Understanding is the inexpensive part. Living differently is the part almost nobody follows all the way through completely, even once. If something in you just resisted that sentence slightly, good. That resistance means it landed somewhere real, not somewhere abstract, and easy to nod past from a safe emotional distance tonight while listening quietly. Here's the new layer worth adding to everything already said so far tonight. Alignment with this kind of contact isn't a single decision made once and maintained automatically afterward without any further effort. It's closer to a practice, repeated in small, unremarkable moments, mostly invisible to anyone watching your life from the outside completely. Nobody applauds you for noticing a dismissive thought and quietly choosing not to feed it further tonight, alone, in an ordinary room. Consider what changes, specifically, once contradiction stops being your default response to something unexplainable happening around you. Recognition stops requiring so much internal debate, because there's no longer a second skeptical voice arguing constantly against the quieter one in real time. Strange moments stop feeling like they require immediate explanation, because the explaining itself was often just compensation for an openness that wasn't stable enough to hold steadily on its own 2 feet. This is where urgency finally deserves to enter the conversation honestly, without any manipulation attached to it whatsoever. Not urgency borrowed from a countdown or some limited window closing somewhere far away from you tonight. Real urgency, the kind that comes from doing simple math about how many more years you're willing to spend financing the same dismissal before finally addressing what's actually sitting underneath it. That math is yours to do, quietly, tonight, away from this video entirely and on your own terms, in your own time. Nobody else can do it for you, and no single video, however clear, can walk you through resolving years of rehearsed doubt in the space of 20 minutes total. What it can do, what this conversation has been doing since the very first question tonight, is make the pattern visible enough that pretending not to see it finally stops feeling honest to you at all. There's a specific kind of relief that arrives once contradiction gets named clearly instead of vaguely sensed underneath everything else happening in your life. It's not celebration. It's quieter than that. Closer to finally setting down something heavy you'd forgotten you are even still carrying through every dismissed moment this year alone. That relief is where the next part actually begins. Not with more explanation of what's wrong, but with what it actually looks like to meet the specific contact differently. Starting from wherever you happen to be standing right now, tonight, without waiting for more proof to arrive first before you begin. Meeting this contact differently doesn't start with a dramatic sign finally arriving to convince you completely once and for all. It starts smaller than that, quieter than that, almost too ordinary to register as the beginning of anything significant at all tonight. You simply catch one dismissive thought, once in real time, and choose not to feed it further. That's the entire mechanism. No proof required first, ever. Let's gather what's actually been said tonight, not as a summary to skim past quickly, but as a shape worth seeing whole for the first time clearly. There was never only silence out there, waiting patiently for enough evidence to finally break through convincingly. There was a lens, deciding long ago what counted as safe enough to receive. There was resistance dressed carefully as caution. There was an identity too small to hold what's actually already arriving. And underneath all of it, one single mechanism, repeating itself in different disguises so it would never be recognized as the same pattern twice in a row. Here's something worth feeling honestly before this closes tonight. For good. None of this was ever really about waiting for something to arrive from somewhere impossibly far away. Sign by sign, moment by moment, it was about attention. Where it rests, what it's decided to call impossible. What it quietly stopped questioning long before tonight ever gave it real language to hold. Change attention's relationship to what's already here, and the entire experience of contact reorganizes itself completely without needing anything external to prove itself first. You didn't come here by accident tonight, and neither did this. You came into this video carrying a familiar suspicion that something has been reaching toward you specifically. And by now, that suspicion finally has a shape it didn't have an hour ago. It has a mechanism. It has a location. Not somewhere among distant stars, not only in strange moments waiting to be catalogued and studied later on. It lives in the quiet architecture of what you've decided is possible for you to receive. And it has been running there, mostly unexamined, for longer than you've had words to name it clearly until right now. Here's the part that tends to stay after everything else fades, so let it settle rather than rushing past it quickly tonight. This was never about distance at all. Not once. It was about willingness. Something older than any single sign, still active, still asking something specific of everyone sensing it at once across the entire world tonight. And what gets dismissed can eventually be met clearly, not through more proof but through noticing, repeated calmly without needing certainty to arrive first before you begin the work. At its core, this was never only about what's approaching from somewhere distant and unfamiliar. It was about how you're already perceiving what's sitting right beside you tonight, long before the next sign arrives to test whether anything inside you has genuinely changed at all. The link is waiting in the first pinned comment beneath this video, exactly where it's been since this conversation started tonight. I want to be honest with you about something before you close this tab and let the night carry you somewhere else entirely on your own. Material like this rarely stays available for long, not because of manufactured scarcity, but because what's written in those pages tends to unsettle narratives that plenty of people have a quiet interest in keeping exactly as they are. And knowledge like that has a long documented history of being pushed quietly out of view whenever it starts spreading too widely among ordinary people. Don't wait for a clearer sign to arrive before taking this seriously tonight, because it won't arrive dressed any differently than the quiet feeling you've already had right here. You didn't reach this exact sentence by accident, and some part of you has probably already sensed that, even if you haven't said it to yourself directly yet in so many words. Read with an open mind, without rushing toward the final page just to say you finished it completely tonight. Let certain lines sit longer than you expect them to at first. And if something in there reaches a part of you that's been sensing this quietly for a long time now, leave one word in the comments below. Desperto. Not as performance, not for anyone else watching, just as a quiet signal that some part of you was ready for this long before tonight ever gave it a name.